Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and of course I'm here with Mike Connor and Mike Simmons, and they had a conversation recently that I heard, and I said, look, we've got to talk about this on the show, and that is the idea that traction is no substitution for revenue. Mike and Mike, start us out. What do you mean by that?
Well, I know right now I've got a lot of traction.
Oh, that's great that you picked that up. And kind of timely too, because we were just noticing that we're in a incubator space, or it's basically the Arizona State University campus for innovation, and we're an affiliate member. And there's about 40 companies that are in this building, and we're all getting companies launched and things like that. But anyhow, we noticed a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it said, I think the title of the meeting, because they host a lot of public meetings, but there was a meeting in there and it was for an organization, and the title of it was Gaining Traction in 2017. And it was intended to really be a good preparation meeting for the year. And we've always told our team that traction is no substitute for revenue because of the discussions that usually happen when we hear a sales rep say, oh, I'm getting a lot of traction. And if we filter that, that usually means, hey, I'm really busy and some cool stuff's happening, but let's not get into the details. Let's just call it traction. So I think that's where we started using it. And our whole team knows that about us, that the word traction kind of drives us nuts because it's just it just doesn't mean anything. And when our team saw that, they suggested maybe we go down and participate in the seminar because maybe we'd learn about how awesome traction is. But
well, I forget, we didn't include traction in our sales process, did we?
No. The beauty of traction is it seems to weave in and out of the entire sales process from the beginning to the end without any sort of specific meaning.
And most of the time when it's brought up, it might just sit without any specific meaning. But when you get to the root of it, it's that all of a sudden things have stalled. We're no longer really moving things forward. But we're having a lot of good meetings. We're having a lot of good research discussions. We're having a lot of good. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what's actionable?
I linked with 3 people on LinkedIn today. They accepted my connection.
Well, that's traction.
Awesome traction. Wow, I hope your SSI score goes up this week. I'm getting traction with my SSI score. I'm up to an 84. Like, really?
Mike's being a jerk about SSI scores because I've been kicking his butt in SSI score now for the last about 6 weeks. And what we've kind of figured out, at least at this point, is the SSI algorithm is a bit skewed and really is just there for you to do the things that LinkedIn wants you to do.
Well, if they're smart about it, they'd realize it's my credit card that pays for our group subscription. And they'd say, hey, we better at least make this guy look good. So let's give him some extra points just for paying the bill. But yeah, I envy it actually, because I think it's the ultimate form of gamification baked into a product that's done flawlessly. And as salespeople, we're gullible to be competitive and care about things like a random number that a vendor gives you. But anyhow, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Getting back to the traction piece, what does that mean? And where it usually comes up is when we start doing things like, well, let's look at our pipeline. What do we have? And what stages are these opportunities in? And let's start talking about the real health of the pipeline that a sales rep has. And usually I hear more traction conversation after we've had maybe a pipeline review that would indicate, oh, there's a lot of work here to be done to either get new opportunity at the front end of the process, or maybe we've got a lot of opportunity that wasn't qualified properly, or maybe it's stalled in the sales process. And it's the quick, easy way to say, yeah, I'm busy and I'm moving things forward. But we tend to push back on the traction. And the reason I think we're kind of sensitive to it is because when we do ask one follow-up question, like, oh, it's great to hear you're getting traction. What does that mean? What moved forward? Where are you in the process? And what did you accomplish? Or what makes you think that we've either unstuck an opportunity or we've made meaningful progress? And then you don't really get a specific answer other than, I had a really great call. Tell me about it. What was the call? What did we move forward? What did we talk about? What made it great? The fact that they actually picked up the phone and talked to you for 20 minutes? Okay, that's great. Not really if it's not moving anything forward. You've just taken up their time and your time, and you've spent 20 minutes you can't get back.
It kind of gets into that whole idea of, am I working for the sake of working, or am I actually being productive? Am I actually we keep talking about, or I keep talking about moving the ball forward. Mike just talked about moving forward. It's, am I actually making progress versus am I just going through the motion? And do I feel like I've gotten some things done? And we've talked about this before, I think, on podcasts. And one of my favorite quotes in a Christmas movie, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, is when Clark is working on the lights and he can't get the lights to turn on, and the grandpa says, "I hope you realize what a horrible waste of resources this was." And the daughter says, "Grandpa, he worked really hard on this." And the grandpa responds back and says, "Yeah, so do washing machines." And I joke with people about, don't be a washing machine. And they hear that and they see it and they know that my playbook's not very deep. My movie quotes aren't very deep. They hear the same ones over and over and over again. And sometimes I think I gain traction with those movie quotes. And then maybe sometimes we've got to go back and revisit this whole idea of traction. Would you rather gain traction or generate revenue? I think another thing that comes to mind on this traction thing is most people that you work with want to help you. They want to help and they want to do good by others. So in these meetings, many times when things aren't moving forward, you've got to ask yourself, is this person working with me just because they want to be nice and they don't want to let me down? Or are they working with me because they're actually interested in what I have to say and where the solution might fit inside their organization, and they see application? Many times you hear this phrase that a salesperson is usually the easiest person to sell to. Are you being sold to by your customer that this time was well spent, or are you being critical about the discussions you're having with people?
Mike Simmons, I've heard you say before that there's a big difference between action and progress, and it sounds a lot like traction is action. So how do you know if you're just doing something to say there's traction, or doing something to be busy, or making actual progress?
My favorite one is when I look at sales opportunities in our CRM and I see a move from when they're in there at the end of a given month. That's usually a pretty good indicator. But so they might be in there June 30th, and then a couple of days before June 30th, they move out to July 31st. A couple of days before July 31st, they move out to August 31st. And then a couple of days before that, maybe they move it out to October 31st and just skip September. But these deals just keep getting moved.
It's a pain to change it every month.
Yeah, and they just keep getting moved out. And you've got to ask yourself, you know what your sales cycles are. You know what the budget process is on the client side, I hope. If you know that your sales cycle usually is 60 days or 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, and you're still working on the same opportunity for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe all you've been getting or generating is traction and not real progress. So I'd go back to the data and look at it and say, how does this align with other things where I've been successful? Did I miss this budget cycle and things didn't move forward? Do I keep kicking the can down the road because I think something's going to happen with this opportunity? And if that's the case, if you're getting into that mode, be realistic. And for me, what I like to do at that point is put together a clear list of things that need to happen in the next 30, 60, 90 days, and then look at it at 180 days. So I've got a 3-month plan and I've got a 6-month plan. And then I need to hold myself accountable to marking those items off the list. Did I get the proof of concept in place, or have I opened up a trial? Did the organization I'm working with use the product during that period of time? Have I identified the success metrics that are going to help move this deal forward or validate that this is the right fit inside their organization? And a lot of this, if you read between the lines, it's kind of get back to your process. Get back to your process and make sure, am I working through my sales process, or did I skip a step because I thought I could speed this thing up? And instead, all I found out is I've created traction.
Mike Connor, I'm going to bounce the same question to you. How do you know if it's just action and traction versus progress?
Well, the real difference in the reason that we use a thinking sales process is that it's not telling you what to do next. It's not telling you, here's the busy activity you need to do in order to make it to the next step of the sales process. What we have is a methodology that when you apply it consistently, you know where you stand, and it helps you guide your thinking about what you should be doing next. And all of those things that are coming next have requirements, that they have steps that you would take. If the next step is to really understand feasibility, that you're on the right track with your buyers and you have one buyer that's evaluating your proposed solution. You know that the steps are, okay, I need to put together what that presentation looks like. I know that I've got to schedule a meeting with that decision maker. I know that I've got to be prepared for it. So there's very specific activities that you can measure against, and then you can measure the outcomes to say, okay, if my goal was to get this feasibility step past, and one of the things I had to do was walk this person through the solution, I have an expected outcome and I can measure the progress. Activity, a lot of times with just random activity, you could be really, really busy, but never really move anything forward. And so I'd much rather, and this is something that I kind of hear come up even from a sales rep perspective, where what they're being measured on are activity metrics. And my boss is mad because, and I just had this conversation actually with a guy last week in our building that works for kind of a large company. It's a sales organization of a couple hundred people, and they do have very traditional activity-based metrics. And the thing they harp on is the number of dials this guy's making every day, the number of contact attempts that he's making. And we were talking about that, and he was saying that every week he really gets hounded because he shows low activity with the amount of outbound outreach he's doing on their phone system. And I asked him, I said, well, how do your results map against your peers? And he said, well, I'm always in the top 3 of my team, which is about 12 people, and usually in the top 10 of the couple hundred people. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, I mean, if I was that sales leader, I'd say, okay, well, what's he doing differently? He doesn't have to churn out 50 dials a day to get a desired business outcome. He's actually working smarter, and he's only maybe reaching out to 20 or 25 people a day. So you can satisfy activity metrics by doing a rote activity that shows completed the task. But if you didn't move anything forward, what's the point?
As Mike was going through that story, the thing that comes to mind for me is driving in a car. So let's say I'm getting ready to go. We're out here in Scottsdale. I'm getting ready to go out on a family trip over the weekend, and we're going to drive to California. And we're going to be in Laguna Hills. If I want to look at how I'm going to measure my success and being able to get to Laguna Hills, I better drive through Quartzsite. I better drive through Blythe. I better drive through Palm Springs. I better drive through Riverside. I better drive through Irvine, and I can get off a couple of exits and be in Laguna Hills. Now, those might be my measurables if I'm actually measuring activity aligned to success in the process. If I'm just measuring miles, I could get in my car and I could start driving. And before you know it, I could be in Flagstaff, or I could be out in someplace in Utah, drive the same number of miles, but not be any closer to my goal. So I think as a sales group of sales professional, sales leadership, we've got to make sure we are measuring the right activities that indicate progress through that journey that we're targeting. And I think of those as guideposts. And for us, the guidepost that we've set is our sales process. It's, we've got these steps in qualification that we need to go through. We've got this step called fit that we need to go through. We've got this step called feasibility that we need to go through. And if we didn't go through each of those guideposts, the likelihood of our proposal being successful is significantly diminished. But as a team, like in this instance that Mike's talking about, let's make sure we're measuring the right things. We better not be measuring miles. We better not be measuring the number of times I turn the car on. We better not be measuring the amount of gas that I put in the vehicle. We've got to be measuring, did I make it through those mileposts?
Trying to think if there's an In-N-Out burger at each one of those cities you named.
There's one on Ramon Road.
I think why you picked those cities, and there's got to be something to this.
That is my, when people ask me what best place to go to eat, favorite restaurant, In-N-Out. That's what his hamburger is all about. The place is awesome.
Free plug for In-N-Out today.
There you go. Free plug for In-N-Out. So,
well, I hear two things going on here, really. One is that a sales professional individually can focus too much on traction rather than revenue or progress. But then an organization can be measuring the wrong things entirely and really push sales professionals to measure their traction rather than the progress.
Absolutely. And think about the bad behavior that you're driving there. I'm trying to think of, and I'm sure Mike's laughing on the inside related to this one, but we had a guy that we used to work with who would carpet bomb people with email, and just, it would get so much email out there. And then you'd go into a sales meeting where the person who was leading that team would be talking, and one of the things they'd highlight are the number of outreaches that this person did. And we'll leave those names alone so we protect the innocent. But yeah, awesome. So you had 3,000 outreaches. There's no way a person individually can reach out to 3,000 people with a high level of effectiveness other than just you've spammed 3,000 people. And we're highlighting that as an example of good work. Let's just make sure you're not measuring the wrong things.
Yeah. As sales leaders, we can definitely drive the wrong behaviors. That I think I've talked about it before, but that's one thing I learned in college when I worked in a call center is every metric can be gamed. Every metric can be beat. And so just be careful which ones you put out there, because if it's just an activity metric that you can somehow fabricate or really do more damage than you're doing good, it's another topic. But you're right, Jody. It is actually, those are two very important points.
What's awesome is when they read it in a book, that these are the measures of success. I mean, there's so many of these that are out there that make you cringe. And what's frightening is that book ends up being the book that the CEO in the organization picks up and then brings it back to the sales leadership and says, I just read this thing on hacking growth or hacking revenue or hacking whatever. And be careful about the flavors of the day stuff, because it's those decisions that really could detract your team and take them right off the rails. So I've talked about rails from a train perspective. I've talked about getting in a car. The only thing we haven't talked about is, I guess, planes and buses yet. Boats.
There's a lot of options.
There's a lot of options. Mopeds.
Segways.
Scooters.
I think Mike Simmons is ready for a road trip, ready to travel somewhere.
Sounds like it.
I actually hate road trips. Put me on an airplane.
Well, Mike and Mike, this has been some great insight on traction being no substitute for revenue. You can find more resources at catalystsale.com, including all of these podcast episodes. Thank you, Mike and Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.